The message came from a blocked number and contained only one sentence: "She's ready to talk, but they already know you're looking for her." I read it 3 times before realizing my hands were shaking. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn, my laptop still open to the same database I'd been searching for the past 6 hours. The glow from the screen made everything else in the room disappear into shadow. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the city hummed with its usual indifference. I should have deleted the message. I should have turned off my phone, closed the laptop, and gone to bed like a normal person. But I'd stopped being a normal person 3 months ago, the day I found the folder. My name is Maya Reeves. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, I was a financial analyst for a mid-tier consulting firm in Manhattan. Boring work, stable income, the kind of job where you stop noticing the days passing. I wasn't chasing stories or investigating anyone. I wasn't trying to be brave. But then my father died. He had a heart attack in his study on a Sunday morning. Sudden, the doctors said. Unexpected. He was 61, relatively healthy, no prior symptoms. My mother found him slumped over his desk, still holding a pen. At the funeral, people kept telling me how sorry they were, how much they'd miss him, how he was such a good man. And he was. My father was careful, quiet, methodical. He'd been an accountant for over 30 years, working for various firms. Always steady, always reliable. 2 weeks after we buried him, I went to his house to help my mother sort through his office. That's when I found it. It wasn't hidden, exactly. It was in a filing cabinet, 3rd drawer down, in a folder labeled Personal, 1998. Inside were photocopies of financial records, handwritten notes in my father's precise script, and a list of names I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was just old work stuff. But then I started reading. The documents showed wire transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, millions of dollars moving through layered transactions designed to obscure their origin. And in the margins, my father had written questions. Where is this really going? Who authorized this? Why was I asked to backdate these entries? At the bottom of the folder was a single photograph, slightly faded. It showed 5 men standing outside a restaurant I didn't recognize. They were all dressed in expensive suits, all smiling. My father wasn't in the photo. But on the back, in his handwriting, it said, Caruso's birthday, 1997. The night everything changed. I didn't know who Caruso was. I didn't know any of these men. But I knew my father's handwriting, and I knew the tone of those notes. He'd been scared. I took the folder home. I didn't tell my mother. Something about the way it had been filed, separate from everything else, made me think he'd wanted to keep it quiet. Maybe he'd forgotten about it. Maybe he'd been waiting for the right moment to do something with it. Or maybe he'd been too afraid. I started researching the names. It took time. I had a full-time job, and I couldn't exactly tell my boss I was spending my lunch breaks digging through archived news articles and public records. But piece by piece, I started to understand. The men in the photograph weren't just businessmen. They were connected. One of them, Vincent Caruso, had been investigated twice by the FBI in the late 90s for racketeering. The charges never stuck. Another, Richard Hale, owned a chain of construction companies that had been linked to money laundering in a case that went nowhere. A third, Anthony DeLuca, had ties to unions that were notorious for corruption. And the money my father had been tracking? It flowed through all of them. I should have stopped there. I should have taken the folder to the police or a lawyer or someone who actually knew what to do with it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my father had died with this secret, and that maybe it wasn't as sudden as everyone thought. So I kept digging. I started small. I requested public records. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests. I searched court documents and old newspaper archives. I found patterns, payments that coincided with construction bids, transfers that happened right before major contracts were awarded. The more I looked, the more it became clear that this wasn't just old history. Some of these companies were still operating. Some of these names still appeared in public records. And then, about 6 weeks into my research, I found Sarah Chen. Her name appeared in a deposition from 2003, buried in a lawsuit that had been settled out of court. She'd worked as an administrative assistant for one of Richard Hale's companies. In her testimony, she mentioned being asked to prepare documents that didn't match the actual transactions, and being told to backdate certain files. The case was settled before she could be cross-examined. After that, her name disappeared from public records entirely. I tried to find her. I searched social media, public databases, everything I could think of. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished. And then, 3 nights ago, I got a different kind of message. It came through an encrypted app I barely used. No name, no profile picture. Just a message: "You're looking for Sarah Chen. Stop." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I didn't stop. If anything, the message made me more determined. Someone knew I was searching. Someone was paying attention. I reached out to a former colleague who worked in data security, asked him if there was any way to trace people who'd gone off-grid. He was hesitant at first, but eventually he gave me the name of someone who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. A private investigator named Marcus Webb. I met Marcus 2 days later in a coffee shop in Queens. He was older than I expected, maybe late 50s, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things he didn't talk about. "Why are you looking for this woman?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I told him the truth. Or most of it. I explained about my father, the folder, the documents. I didn't mention the encrypted message. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "You know what you're doing is dangerous," he said finally. "I need to know what happened. Your father kept those documents for 27 years and never did anything with them. You ever think maybe he had a reason? Maybe he was waiting for someone else to do it?" Marcus sighed. "Or maybe he knew that going after these people would get him killed." The words hung in the air between us. "Do you think that's what happened?" I asked quietly. "I think men who move that kind of money don't like being exposed. I think your father was smart enough to know that." He paused. "But I also think if you're determined to do this, you should at least do it right." He agreed to help me find Sarah Chen. He said it would take time, maybe a week or 2, and that I needed to be patient. He also told me to be careful. "Don't talk about this with anyone. Don't use my regular phone for anything sensitive. Don't follow any patterns in my daily routine." I followed his advice. I started taking different routes to work. I turned off location services on my phone. I stopped posting on social media. And then tonight, I got the message. "She's ready to talk, but they already know you're looking for her." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. The message had come from a blocked number, not the encrypted app. That meant someone had my real number. Someone knew exactly who I was. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Did you send me a message?" I asked. "What kind of message?" I read it to him. There was a long silence. "That wasn't me," he said finally. His voice was tight. "Maya, listen to me very carefully. Do not respond to that message. Do not go anywhere alone. Someone is trying to draw you out. But what if it's real? What if Sarah Chen actually wants to talk? Then why would they tell you that someone already knows? Think about it. If she wanted to talk, she'd do it quietly. This message is designed to make you panic, to make you do something stupid. So what do I do? You stay put. You stay inside. I'm going to make some calls, see if I can figure out where this is coming from." He hung up. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, staring at the message. Marcus was right. It didn't make sense. If Sarah Chen wanted to talk, there were a dozen safer ways to reach out. This felt like bait, but what if it wasn't? I thought about my father, about the notes he'd left behind, about the questions he'd never been able to answer. I thought about the fear I'd heard in Marcus's voice, the way he'd told me to stay inside like I was a child who needed protecting. I wasn't a child, and I was already in this too deep to stop now. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the research I'd been compiling. There had to be something I was missing, some connection I hadn't seen yet. I went back through the financial records, the names, the dates. And that's when I noticed it. One of the shell companies that had appeared in my father's notes was called Meridian Holdings. I'd looked into it before, but it had seemed like a dead end. The company had been dissolved in 2004, and I couldn't find much information about it. But tonight, I searched the name again, this time adding Sarah Chen to the query. A single result came up, a small article from a local Pennsylvania newspaper, dated March 2003. The headline read, "Former employee files complaint against local firm." The article was brief, only a few paragraphs. It described how Sarah Chen, a former administrative assistant at Meridian Holdings, had filed a complaint with the Department of Labor alleging wage theft and intimidation. The company had denied the allegations. The case was settled privately, but it was the last line of the article that made my blood run cold. Chen could not be reached for comment. Sources say she left the area shortly after filing the complaint and has not been seen since. I read it again, and again. 23 years ago, Sarah Chen had tried to speak out. And then she'd disappeared. I felt the walls of my apartment closing in. Someone had known she was talking. Someone had made her leave. And now, 23 years later, someone knew I was looking for her. My phone buzzed. Another message. Same blocked number. "If you want the truth, you need to come alone. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. I'll send the address in the morning. Don't tell anyone, not Marcus, not the police. If you bring anyone, she won't talk." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling again. This was insane. Everything about this screamed trap. But what if it wasn't? What if Sarah Chen really was ready to talk? After all these years? What if she'd been hiding, waiting for someone to care enough to find her? What if this was my only chance? I thought about my father. I thought about the folder he'd kept hidden for nearly 3 decades, the questions he'd never answered, the fear he must have carried. I typed back, "How do I know this is real?" The response came almost immediately. "Your father's name was John Reeves. He worked for Meridian Holdings in 1997. He found discrepancies in the accounts and asked too many questions. They paid him to forget. But he never forgot. Neither did she." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. No one knew about my father's connection to Meridian Holdings. I'd only just found that name myself, buried in the documents. I hadn't told Marcus. I hadn't told anyone. Whoever was sending these messages knew things they shouldn't know. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell Marcus. I wasn't going to tell anyone. Tomorrow night, I would go alone. I know how that sounds. I know it was reckless and stupid and exactly what they wanted me to do. But I'd come too far to turn back now. If there was even a chance that Sarah Chen could tell me what really happened, I had to take it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, my laptop open, going through everything I'd compiled one more time. I made copies of all the documents, uploaded them to a secure cloud server, and sent an email to myself with instructions to send everything to a journalist if I didn't log in within 48 hours. It wasn't much, but it was something. When the sun came up, I went through my normal routine. I showered, got dressed, made coffee. I went to work like nothing was wrong. I sat through meetings, responded to emails, pretended to care about quarterly projections. All day, I kept checking my phone, waiting for the address. It came at 4:37 p.m. 2247 Riverside Drive, Apartment 6C. 9 p.m. Come alone. I looked up the address. It was in the Bronx, near the water, in a neighborhood I didn't know. The building looked old in the street view images, the kind of place where people minded their own business. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. I went home and changed into dark clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing that would stand out. I put my phone in my pocket, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The subway ride took 40 minutes. I kept my head down, watching the other passengers, looking for anyone who might be following me. No one stood out, no one seemed to care. I got off at the last stop and walked the rest of the way. The neighborhood was quiet, rows of old apartment buildings with fire escapes and laundry hanging from windows. The streetlights were dim, casting long shadows. 2247 Riverside Drive was at the end of a block, a 6-story brick building with a faded green awning. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The lobby smelled like old carpet and something vaguely chemical. The elevator was out of order, so I took the stairs. My footsteps echoed in the empty stairwell. 6th floor, apartment 6C. I stood outside the door for a long moment, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to call Marcus and tell him where I was. But I'd come this far. I knocked. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps inside, slow and deliberate. The door opened. The woman standing in front of me was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked older than I expected. Deep lines around her eyes, but her gaze was sharp and alert. "Sarah Chen?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, studying my face like she was trying to decide something. "Are you alone?" she asked finally. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Yes." She glanced past me, down the hallway, then stepped aside. "Come in, quickly." I walked into the apartment. It was small, sparsely furnished. A couch, a table, a single lamp casting a weak yellow light. The windows were covered with thick curtains. Sarah closed the door behind me and locked it. 3 separate locks. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the couch. I sat. She remained standing, arms crossed, watching me. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I didn't. You found me." She shook her head. "I didn't send you any messages." My stomach dropped. "What? I didn't send you anything. I don't even have your number." I stood up, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. "Then who did?" "The same people who've been watching you for the past 3 months." The room seemed to tilt. "I don't understand." Sarah walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly, just enough to look down at the street. "They've known about you since the day you found your father's files. They've been tracking every search you made, every person you contacted. They knew you'd eventually find my name. And when you did, they knew you'd come looking." "Who are they?" "The people your father tried to expose. The people who paid him to stay quiet." She turned to look at me. "The people who killed him." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "My father had a heart attack." "Is that what they told you?" "That's what the doctors said. There was an autopsy. Autopsies can be manipulated. Reports can be altered. Your father knew too much, and when they realized he'd kept those documents, they couldn't take the risk." She paused. "He wasn't the first person they've killed. And he won't be the last." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you've walked into. You think you're investigating some old financial crimes, some corrupt businessmen who got away with it. But this goes so much deeper than that." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "The men in that photograph your father kept? They weren't just criminals, they were connected to people at the highest levels. Politicians, judges, police commissioners. They built an entire network designed to move money, to rig contracts, to control who got power and who didn't. And you have proof of this?" "I have documents, recordings, names and dates and transactions that would destroy careers, send people to prison for life." She paused. "That's why I've been hiding for 23 years. So why come forward now?" Sarah looked at me for a long moment. "Because I'm dying." The room fell silent. "I have maybe 6 months," she continued. "And I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. If I'm going to die anyway, I might as well tell the truth." She walked to a closet and pulled out a box. Set it on the table. "This is everything I took when I left Meridian Holdings. Every document they tried to hide, every record they tried to destroy. I've kept it safe all these years." I stared at the box. "Why give it to me?" "Because your father tried to do the right thing, and they silenced him. Because you're the only person who's come looking for answers. And because," she hesitated, "because I think you deserve to know what he was trying to protect you from." I opened the box. Inside were folders, USB drives, notebooks filled with handwritten notes. It would take weeks to go through all of it. There's something else you need to know, Sarah said quietly. The messages you received, the ones that brought you here, they weren't from me. They were from someone who wanted to see if you'd come alone, if you'd follow instructions. This was a test. A test for what? To see if you could be controlled. Or if you needed to be eliminated. My blood went cold. You're saying they wanted me to come here? I'm saying they wanted to see what you'd do. And now they know. She walked back to the window, looked out again. You have maybe 10 minutes before they arrive. You need to take this box and leave. Right now. What about you? I'm already dead. It doesn't matter. She turned to face me. But you still have a chance. Take these documents. Find someone you trust, someone with the power to actually do something with them. And don't stop until the truth comes out. I grabbed the box, my hands shaking. Come with me. I can't. If I leave, they'll know I talked. This way, they'll think you just came here looking for me and found nothing. She moved to the door, unlocked it. There's a back stairwell at the end of the hall. It leads to an alley. Go now. I hesitated. Why are you doing this? Sarah's expression softened, just for a moment. Because your father was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him. And neither do you. She opened the door. I walked out into the hallway, clutching the box. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Behind me, Sarah closed the door. I heard the locks click into place. I ran, down the hallway, past the main stairwell, to the back exit. The door was heavy, metal, and it squealed when I pushed it open. The alley was dark and narrow, lined with dumpsters and trash bags. I didn't look back, I just ran. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the box. I pulled out my phone to call Marcus, but before I could dial, it buzzed. A message. Blocked number. You should have listened. Now we know where you live, who you talk to, where you work. We know everything. If you want to stay alive, you'll destroy those documents and forget this ever happened. You have 24 hours. I stared at the screen, my entire body trembling. They were watching me. Right now, they knew I had the box. I looked around, suddenly aware of every car parked on the street, every window with a light on, every shadow that could be hiding someone. I started walking, faster now, heading toward the subway. I needed to get somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. Where are you? He demanded. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. I'm in the Bronx. What the hell are you doing in the Bronx? I went to meet Sarah Chen. There was a long pause. You did what? She gave me documents. Everything my father was trying to expose. But Marcus, they know. They've been watching me. They sent me messages. Maya, listen to me. Do not go home. Do not go anywhere you normally go. Get to Penn Station and wait for me there. I'm coming to get you. What about the documents? Bring them. We'll figure it out. Just get to Penn Station. Now. He hung up. I kept walking, my legs moving on autopilot. The box felt impossibly heavy in my arms. Inside were the answers I'd been searching for, the truth about my father, about the corruption that had been hidden for decades. But holding that truth had just made me a target. I reached the subway station and went down the stairs, my eyes scanning every face, looking for anyone who seemed too interested, anyone who might be following me. The platform was crowded. I stood near the edge, the box tucked under my arm, trying to blend in. The train arrived. I got on and found a seat near the back. The doors closed. As the train pulled away from the station, I looked out the window. Standing on the platform, watching the train leave, was a man in a dark coat. He was staring directly at me. And then he smiled. The train entered the tunnel, and he disappeared from view. I sat there, my heart racing, my mind spinning. They knew where I'd been. They knew I had the documents. And they were letting me know that they were watching. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. This was about survival. The train ride to Penn Station took 30 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept checking my phone, expecting another message, another threat. Nothing came. When I got off the train, I made my way up to the main concourse. Penn Station at night was a strange mix of commuters, tourists, and people with nowhere else to go. I found a spot near the Amtrak gates where I could see the entire hall. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later. He looked worried, scanning the crowd until he spotted me. "Let's go," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "Where?" "Somewhere safe." He led me out of the station, down into the parking garage. His car was parked on the third level, an old sedan that had seen better days. We got in. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he turned to look at the box I was holding. "Is that it?" he asked. I nodded. "What did she tell you?" I told him everything. The apartment, the conversation, Sarah's claim that my father had been murdered, the message that came while I was leaving. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back in his seat and let out a long breath. "Jesus Christ, Maya, do you have any idea how much danger you're in?" "I'm starting to." He started the car. "We need to get these documents somewhere safe. And then we need to figure out who we can trust." "What about the police?" "The police?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah told you herself. These people have connections everywhere. Politicians, judges, cops. We go to the wrong person. And you'll end up like your father. So what do? We find someone outside the system. A journalist, maybe. Someone with enough of a platform that if anything happens to them, it becomes national news." He pulled out of the parking garage and onto the street. "I know someone. Investigative reporter, works for a major paper. She's exposed corruption before. If anyone can handle this, it's her." "Do you trust her?" "I trust that she cares more about the story than about protecting powerful people." "That's the best we're going to get." We drove in silence for a while. I watched the city pass by outside the window, all those lights and buildings and people who had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. "Marcus," I said quietly, "do you really think they killed my father?" He didn't answer right away. "I think," he said finally, "that people who move hundreds of millions of dollars don't let loose ends exist. And I think your father became a loose end the moment he started asking questions. But it's been 27 years. Why would they kill him now? Maybe they didn't know he still had the documents. Maybe they thought he'd destroyed them, or forgotten about them. But then you started digging. You filed those FOIA requests, searched those databases. They would have been monitoring for anyone looking into Meridian Holdings, any of those shell companies. When your name popped up, they would have connected you to your father. And then," he trailed off, "and then they decided to clean up." Yeah, I felt sick. We drove to a motel on the outskirts of Newark, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions. Marcus got us 2 rooms, paid for 3 nights up front. "Stay here," he said, handing me a key. "Don't open the door for anyone but me. I'm going to make some calls, see if I can set up a meeting with that reporter." "When?" "Tomorrow, hopefully, maybe the day after. We need to move fast, but we also need to be careful." He paused. "Get some sleep if you can. You look like hell." I went to my room. It was small and depressing, with stained carpet and a bed that sagged in the middle. But it had a lock on the door, and right now, that was all that mattered. I set the box on the bed and opened it. Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled with dates and company names. I pulled out the first one and started reading. It was a ledger, showing payments made from various shell companies to individuals whose names were partially redacted. But the amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions, all moving through accounts designed to hide their origin. The next folder contained emails, printed out and highlighted. They were correspondence between executives at Meridian Holdings and various contractors, discussing bids that seemed predetermined, projects that were awarded without proper competitive processes. And then I found the recordings. There were 6 cassette tapes, each labeled with a date and time. I didn't have a cassette player, but the box also contained a USB drive with digital copies. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the first file. It was a phone call. The audio quality was poor, but I could make out 2 voices, both male. We need to make sure the bid comes in at exactly 2.4 million, one voice said. Any higher and it'll raise flags. What about the union? The other voice asked. Taken care of. DeLuca's handling it. They'll approve whatever we need. And the permits? Commissioner Breslin owes us a favor. He'll fast-track them. My hands were shaking as I listened. These weren't vague allegations or circumstantial evidence. This was direct proof of bid rigging, of public officials being bribed or coerced into approving projects. I listened to all 6 recordings. Each one was more damning than the last. They talked about manipulating environmental reports, falsifying safety inspections, paying off auditors. They mentioned names, some I recognized from my research, others I'd never heard before, and in the last recording, I heard a name that made my blood run cold. Reeves is asking too many questions, one voice said. What kind of questions? About the offshore accounts. About where the money's really going. He's not stupid. He's going to figure it out eventually. So what do? There was a long pause. We pay him to forget. And if that doesn't work, we make sure he can't talk. The recording ended. I sat there in the silence of that motel room, staring at the laptop screen. They'd talked about my father. They'd discussed buying his silence. And when I thought about the way he died, so suddenly, so unexpectedly, I couldn't help but wonder if they'd followed through on that threat. I spent the rest of the night going through the documents, making notes, trying to piece together the full scope of what I was looking at. It wasn't just corruption, it was a systemic network of bribery, fraud, and intimidation that had been operating for decades. And the people involved weren't just low-level criminals. There were names I recognized. A former city councilman who'd gone on to become a state senator. A police captain who was now deputy commissioner. A judge who'd presided over dozens of high-profile cases. If this information got out, it would destroy careers. It would lead to investigations, arrests, trials. It would expose how deeply compromised the system really was. No wonder they wanted these documents destroyed. No wonder they were willing to kill to keep them hidden. Around 4 a.m., I finally closed the laptop and lay down on the bed, still fully clothed. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound from outside, a car door closing, footsteps in the hallway, made me jump. I kept thinking about Sarah Chen, alone in that apartment, waiting for them to come. I wondered if she was still alive. I wondered if they'd hurt her for talking to me. And I thought about my father, about the secret he'd carried for so long. He'd known the truth. He'd documented it, preserved it, maybe hoping that someday it could make a difference. He just hadn't lived long enough to see it happen. When the sun came up, I got a text from Marcus. Meeting set for tonight, 8 p.m. I'll pick you up at 7:30. Be ready. I texted back, who's the reporter? Rachel Moreno. She's good. Trust me. I spent the day in that motel room, going through the documents again, trying to organize them in a way that would make sense to someone seeing them for the first time. I made a list of the most damning pieces of evidence, highlighted the recordings that were the most explicit. By the time Marcus arrived, I had everything sorted into a presentation folder. You look terrible, he said when I opened the door. I didn't sleep. Did you eat? I shook my head. He handed me a bag from a fast food place. Eat in the car. We need to go. The drive took 40 minutes. Marcus was quiet, focused on the road. I tried to eat the food he'd brought, but my stomach was in knots. Where are we meeting her? I asked. Her office. It's in the city, Midtown. She's waiting for us. Is it safe? Safer than meeting somewhere public. Her office has security, cameras. If anyone tries anything, there'll be a record. We parked in a garage beneath a nondescript office building. Marcus led me to the elevators, up to the 15th floor. The hallway was empty, corporate and sterile. Rachel Moreno's office was at the end of the hall. Marcus knocked. The door opened. Rachel was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s. With short dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, but there was an intensity about her that made it clear she took her work seriously. You're Maya? She asked. I nodded. She stepped aside. Come in. Her office was cluttered with papers, books, old case files stacked on every available surface. A laptop sat open on her desk, multiple monitors showing what looked like news feeds and databases. "Marcus says you have something I need to see," Rachel said, closing the door behind us. I set the box on her desk. My father was an accountant. Before he died, he left behind documents showing financial fraud, bribery, bid rigging. It goes back decades, and the people involved. I took a breath. They're still in power. Rachel opened the box and started pulling out folders. She scanned a few pages, her expression unchanging. "This is from Meridian Holdings?" she asked. "You know about them?" "I've been investigating them for the past 2 years. They were one piece of a larger corruption network I've been trying to expose. But I've never been able to get hard evidence. Every time I got close, witnesses would disappear or suddenly refuse to talk." She looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" "A woman named Sarah Chen. She worked for Meridian in the 90s. She's been hiding ever since." Rachel's eyes widened. "Sarah Chen is alive? You know her?" "I've been trying to find her for 18 months. Everyone I talked to said she was dead." She pulled out one of the folders, flipped through it. "Jesus, this is exactly what I needed. So you can use it? If it's authentic, yes. But I need to verify everything. Cross-reference the documents with public records, confirm the recordings are legitimate." She looked at me. "This is going to take time." "How much time?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. I need to be absolutely certain before I publish. If I get this wrong, if there's even one piece that doesn't hold up, the whole thing falls apart." "I don't have a month," I said. "They know I have these documents. They've already threatened me. If I wait too long, then you go somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find you." Rachel's voice was firm. "I've done this before. I know how to handle dangerous stories. But you need to trust the process." Marcus spoke up. "She's right, Maya. If we rush this, we'll make mistakes. And mistakes will get you killed." I wanted to argue, but I knew they were right. This wasn't something I could just dump on social media and hope for the best. It needed to be done carefully, methodically. "Okay," I said finally. "What do I do?" Rachel pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "This is the number for a colleague of mine. She runs a safe house network for sources who are in danger. Call her, tell her I sent you. She'll get you somewhere secure." "What about the documents?" "I'll make copies of everything, store them in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, the information will still get out." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. Once I start publishing this, there's no going back. People are going to deny it, attack your credibility, maybe come after you even harder. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my father, about Sarah Chen, about all the people who'd been silenced or intimidated into staying quiet. "Yes," I said. Rachel nodded. "Then we have a deal." Marcus and I left her office an hour later. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd passed the burden of those documents to someone who could actually do something with them. But as we walked back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Marcus," I said quietly, "do you ever feel like—" I didn't get to finish the sentence. A car pulled up beside us, fast. The back door opened. "Get in," a voice said. I froze. Marcus grabbed my arm, started to pull me back. But then I saw who was in the car. It was Sarah Chen. "Get in," she said again. Her voice urgent. "We don't have time." I looked at Marcus. He looked as confused as I felt. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "They know you were at Rachel's office. They're coming for you, right now. If you want to live, get in the car." Marcus pulled out his phone, but Sarah shook her head. "They're tracking your phones. Both of you. Throw them out, now." I hesitated for only a second. Then I pulled out my phone and dropped it on the ground. Marcus did the same. We got in the car. Sarah didn't say anything. She just drove, fast, weaving through traffic like she'd done this before. "I thought you were staying in that apartment," I said. "You said you were going to let them think I found nothing." I lied. "Why?" "Because I needed to see if you'd actually go through with it. If you'd take the documents to someone who could use them." She glanced at me in the rearview mirror. You passed the test. This was another test? Everything is a test. That's how you survive. She turned onto a highway, heading north. Rachel Moreno is good, but she's not the only person you need to talk to. There are others. People who've been waiting for evidence like this for years. Who? Federal prosecutors. FBI agents who aren't on the payroll. People inside the system who still give a damn about the truth. She paused. But first, we need to get you somewhere they can't reach you. Marcus leaned forward. Where are we going? Upstate. There's a place I've used before. It's secure. How do you know they're not following us? Because I've been doing this for 23 years. I know how to disappear. We drove in silence for a long time. I watched the city fall away behind us, replaced by highways and eventually trees and darkness. Around midnight, Sarah pulled off onto a small road that wound through dense forest. We drove for another 20 minutes before she finally stopped in front of a small cabin, barely visible in the dark. We'll stay here tonight, she said. Tomorrow, I'll make some calls. The cabin was basic. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, no internet. But it had heat and running water, and most importantly, it was isolated. Sarah made coffee while Marcus and I sat at the small kitchen table. Why are you helping us? I asked her. Sarah didn't answer right away. She poured 3 cups of coffee, set them on the table, and sat down. Because I'm tired, she said finally. I've spent half my life running from these people, changing my name, moving every few years, always looking over my shoulder. And for what? They're still out there, they're still doing the same things they were doing 30 years ago. Nothing ever changes because people like me stay quiet. She looked at me. But maybe it's different now. Maybe if we actually fight back, we can make it change. Or maybe we all just end up dead, Marcus said. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We're all going to die eventually. Might as well make it mean something. We stayed in that cabin for 3 days. Sarah made calls on a burner phone, setting up meetings, reaching out to contacts she'd maintained over the years. She was careful, never using names, always speaking in vague terms. On the 3rd day, she came back from a walk in the woods and announced that she'd arranged a meeting. With who? I asked. Someone from the Justice Department, Eastern District of New York. He's been investigating organized crime for 15 years. If anyone can use those documents, it's him. Can we trust him? As much as we can trust anyone. She paused. But there's a condition. He wants to meet with you directly. He needs to verify the source, make sure this isn't some elaborate setup. When? Tomorrow. There's a park in Brooklyn, near the waterfront. You'll meet him there at 2 p.m. What about you? I asked. I'll be nearby. If anything goes wrong, I'll get you out. Marcus shook his head. This is a bad idea. We should do this through lawyers, go through proper channels. There are no proper channels, Sarah interrupted. Everyone in this city is either corrupt or scared. This prosecutor is the only shot we have. The next morning, we drove back to the city. Sarah dropped me off 3 blocks from the park and gave me instructions. Walk to the bench near the pier. He'll approach you. Don't say anything until he identifies himself. And if anything feels wrong, if you see anyone who doesn't belong, you walk away. Understand? I nodded. The park was nearly empty when I arrived. It was a cold day, overcast, the kind of weather that kept most people inside. I walked to the bench Sarah had described and sat down. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I was starting to think he wasn't going to show when a man sat down beside me. He was in his 50s, wearing a dark overcoat and glasses, with the kind of tired face that suggested he'd seen too much. Maya Reeves? He said quietly. Yes. He didn't look at me. He just stared out at the water. My name is David Chen. I'm a federal prosecutor. I understand you have information about corruption involving Meridian Holdings and associated entities. I do. I need to see it. I don't have it with me. Then this meeting is pointless. Wait. I pulled out a USB drive from my pocket. This has copies of the most important documents. The recordings, the financial records. Everything you need to start an investigation. He took the drive, examined it briefly, then pocketed it. If this is legitimate, It could lead to dozens of indictments. But I need to verify everything. That's going to take time. How much time? Months, maybe longer. These cases are complicated. We need to build an airtight prosecution, make sure every piece of evidence is admissible. He finally looked at me. In the meantime, you're in danger. These people don't leave witnesses alive. I know. Then you need to disappear. Change your name, leave the state, don't contact anyone from your old life. If you testify, we can put you in witness protection. But until then, you're on your own. He stood up to leave. Wait, I said, what about justice? What about making sure they pay for what they did? David Chen looked at me with something that might have been pity. Justice is slow, and it's messy, and sometimes, even when you do everything right, the people with power find ways to avoid consequences. But I'll do everything I can. That's all I can promise. He walked away. I sat there on that bench, staring out at the water, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over me. My father had spent 27 years keeping these secrets, hoping someday someone would care enough to act on them. And now I'd handed them over to a prosecutor who might spend years building a case that might never even go to trial. It didn't feel like enough, but it was all I had. I met Sarah back at the car. She drove us to a different safe house, this one in Queens, run by a friend of hers who didn't ask questions. What happens now? I asked. Now you wait. You stay hidden. You let the prosecutor do his job. And you? Sarah smiled. I think I'm done hiding. Over the next few weeks, I lived in that safe house, barely leaving, always listening for footsteps in the hallway or a knock at the door. Marcus stayed in touch through encrypted messages, letting me know that Rachel was working on her story, that the prosecutor was reviewing the documents. But nothing seemed to be happening fast enough. And then, 6 weeks after I'd handed over the USB drive, everything changed. Rachel published her first article. It ran on the front page of a major newspaper, with the headline, "Decades of Corruption, How a Shadow Network Controlled New York Construction." The story laid out everything. The shell companies, the rigged bids, the bribes. It named names. It included quotes from the recordings, excerpts from the documents. And it identified my father as the accountant who had first uncovered the fraud. Within hours, the story went viral. Other news outlets picked it up. Politicians started calling for investigations. The FBI announced they were opening a probe. And the people named in the article started lawyering up. I watched it all unfold from that safe house, glued to my laptop, reading every article, every comment, every analysis. For the first time, I felt like maybe this had been worth it. But then Marcus called. You need to see this, he said. He sent me a link to another article, this one published by a tabloid known for sensationalism. The headline read, "Conspiracy or Hoax? Questions surround explosive corruption claims." I read the article. It suggested that the documents might be fabricated, that Sarah Chen was a known conspiracy theorist, that my father had been fired from Meridian Holdings for incompetence and was seeking revenge. None of it was true. But it was effective. Within days, the narrative started to shift. The people accused in Rachel's article went on TV, calling the story a politically motivated hit job. They said the recordings were taken out of context, that the financial records were misinterpreted. And slowly, the public's attention started to drift. I felt like I was watching it all slip away. This is what they do, Sarah told me when I called her, desperate. They attack the credibility of the evidence, the credibility of the sources. They flood the media with counter-narratives until people don't know what to believe anymore. So what do? We keep fighting. We give more interviews. We release more documents. We don't let them control the story. But it was hard. Every day brought new attacks, new accusations. People dug into my past, looking for anything they could use to discredit me. They found old social media posts, out-of-context comments, minor mistakes I'd made years ago. They painted me as a grieving daughter who'd become obsessed with conspiracy theories, who'd been manipulated by a source with her own agenda. And the worst part was, I started to doubt myself. What if the recordings weren't as clear as I thought? What if the documents could be interpreted differently? What if I'd put my trust in the wrong people? It was Marcus who kept me grounded. They're trying to break you, he said. That's their strategy. Make you doubt everything. Make you question your own judgment. Don't let them win. But what if they're right? What if I got this wrong? You didn't get it wrong. I've seen the documents. I've heard the recordings. This is real. And the fact that they're fighting this hard proves they're scared. He was right. If the documents were meaningless, they would have ignored the story, let it fade into obscurity. But instead, they were throwing everything they had at discrediting it. That meant it was working. 3 months after Rachel's first article, the federal prosecutor announced indictments. 12 people were charged with racketeering, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. Among them were former executives of Meridian Holdings, several contractors, and 2 public officials. It wasn't everyone. Some of the biggest names from my father's documents weren't included. But it was a start. The trial took almost a year. I testified. So did Sarah. So did a dozen other witnesses who'd been too afraid to come forward before. The defense attorneys did everything they could to tear us apart. They questioned our motives, our credibility, our sanity. They suggested we were in it for money, for fame, for revenge. But the evidence held up. In the end, 9 of the 12 were convicted. 3 walked free on technicalities. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. After the trial, I tried to go back to my normal life. But there was no normal anymore. I'd lost my job during the investigation. My apartment had been broken into twice. I'd received death threats, had to change my phone number, had to constantly look over my shoulder. Sarah disappeared again. She sent me one final message: "You did good. Stay safe." I never heard from her again. Marcus stayed in touch. He'd become a friend. Maybe the only person who really understood what I'd been through. But even he couldn't answer the question that kept me up at night: had it been worth it? My father was still dead. Sarah was still in hiding. And the system that had allowed all this corruption to flourish was still intact. Yes, some people went to prison. Yes, some careers were ruined. But the network itself, the web of connections and favors and intimidation, that was still there. Just more careful now, more hidden, and I was left with the knowledge that telling the truth had cost me almost everything. But here's the thing I realized, sitting in yet another safe house, watching the news coverage of the convictions, my father had kept those documents for 27 years because he believed, even if he couldn't act on it himself, that someday the truth would matter. And maybe it did. Maybe those 9 convictions would make the next corrupt official think twice. Maybe Rachel's reporting would inspire other journalists to dig deeper. Maybe Sarah's courage in finally coming forward would give other witnesses the strength to speak up. Or maybe it wouldn't change anything at all. I don't know. What I do know is this: there are still documents I haven't released. Names I haven't shared, connections I haven't fully explored. Because the story isn't over. The men in that photograph my father kept, the ones at Caruso's birthday party in 1997? 2 of them are still in power. One is a federal judge. The other runs one of the largest real estate development companies in the state. And I have evidence linking both of them to the corruption network. Evidence that's currently sitting in a safety deposit box in a bank I won't name, in a city I won't specify. Evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in New York. But releasing it would put me back in the crosshairs. It would mean more investigations, more trials, more years of my life consumed by this fight. And I'm tired. So I sit here, in this apartment I rent under a name that isn't mine, and I think about what my father would want me to do. Would he want me to keep fighting? To risk everything for the chance of exposing more corruption? Or would he want me to let it go? To live my life, to find some kind of peace? I wish I could ask him, but all I have are his documents, his questions, his fear. And the weight of knowing that the truth is out there, waiting. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to release it. Maybe someday someone else will find those documents and finish what we started. Or maybe the truth will stay buried, like so many truths before it. I don't know yet, but I'm still here, still watching, still waiting, because this story, It's not finished, not even close.